My name is Diana, and I am 32 years old working as a financial advisor. Life is good now, but it was not always this way. When I was 13, my parents walked out on me, leaving me hungry and alone. My Uncle Jack stepped in and saved me. Years later, when he died, my parents showed up demanding millions from his estate. They never expected the secret clause in his will. Let me know where you are watching from and hit that like and subscribe button before I tell you how justice was finally served in this emotional story of family betrayal. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania called Millfield. It was one of those places where everybody knew each other, where community gatherings were a regular weekend affair, and where your reputation followed you everywhere. My parents, Thomas and Judith Williams, were well known in our community. Dad worked in real estate, buying and selling properties across the state. Mom did not have a job, but she was heavily involved in local social clubs and charity events. At least, that is what she called them. In reality, they were just excuses to show off new clothes, jewelry, or brag about vacations. During my early childhood years, things seemed normal. We lived in a 4-bedroom house with a big backyard. I had my own room decorated in purple and white, my favorite colors at the time. There were family dinners, weekend outings, and birthday celebrations with friends from school. My parents seemed caring, though, looking back, there were always signs of their true nature. They were deeply materialistic people. Success to them was measured by possessions and appearances. "Diana, stand up straight. The Johnsons are watching," my mother would whisper harshly at community events. "Make sure you mention to your teacher that we are going to the Bahamas next month," my father would instruct before school events. Everything was about perception and status. Everything was about looking successful even when we were not. The one genuine relationship I had in my family was with my Uncle Jack, my mother's older brother. Uncle Jack was different from the rest of my family. He had moved to Seattle and built a successful tech company from scratch. He was wealthy, much wealthier than my parents, but he never flaunted it. When he visited, he would bring me books instead of toys and would spend hours talking to me about what I was learning in school. "The greatest investment you can make is in yourself, Diana," he would tell me. "Knowledge is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you." Uncle Jack would visit a few times a year, and those were always my favorite times. He seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not as an accessory to show off to neighbors. He would take me to museums, science centers, and bookstores. We would talk about everything from astronomy to history to business. I was just a kid, but he never talked down to me. When I was around 8 years old, things started to change at home. I overheard arguments between my parents late at night. From what I could gather, Dad had made some bad investments and we were struggling financially. But you would never know it from the outside. Mom still bought expensive clothes, Dad still drove a luxury car, and we still went on vacations, though less frequently. The financial strain began to show in how my parents treated me. Small requests for school supplies would be met with sighs and eye rolls. The tutor I had for math was dismissed without explanation. Birthday presents became noticeably less extravagant, though still showy enough to be photographed for social media. "We cannot afford to waste money on things you do not need right now." Dad would snap when I asked for new shoes because mine had holes. Yet the next day he would come home with a new golf club, or Mom would have a new handbag. Dad started drinking more heavily. He would come home late smelling of alcohol, his words slurring as he complained about clients and colleagues who had betrayed him. Mom spent more time away from home attending her social functions and returning with shopping bags, but an increasingly vacant look in her eyes. I tried everything to please them. I got straight A's in school. I learned to cook simple meals to help out at home. I stopped asking for things. Nothing seemed to make a difference. Their resentment toward me grew, though I could not understand why. I was just a child trying to navigate a household that was becoming increasingly cold and unpredictable. Uncle Jack noticed the changes during his visits. He tried to talk to my mother about it, which only resulted in explosive arguments between them. "You have no right to tell me how to raise my daughter or manage my household, Jack," Mom would shout. "Judith, she is a child. She deserves stability and support." Uncle Jack would respond calmly. I later learned that Uncle Jack had offered financial help to my parents multiple times during this period, but my father's pride would not allow him to accept it. Instead, they borrowed money from predatory lenders and maxed out credit cards to maintain their lifestyle. My 12th birthday was when I truly realized something was deeply wrong. There was a small party at our house, nothing like the elaborate celebrations of previous years. A few friends from school came over. Mom had ordered a cake, but spent the entire party on the phone in another room. Dad showed up an hour late, clearly having been drinking. As my friends left, I overheard Dad saying to Mom, "We would not be in this mess if we did not have to keep spending money on her." That night, I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I had become a burden to the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The next several months were filled with increasing tension. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter. The electricity was shut off twice. Mysterious people would come to the door demanding payments, and my parents would send me to my room. I started to dread coming home from school, never knowing what mood my parents would be in or what crisis would be unfolding. Looking back now, I realize they were already planning their escape, already figuring out how to start over without the burden of a child or the debts they had accumulated. I was just too young to see it coming. My 13th birthday fell on a Tuesday. I woke up expecting at least some acknowledgement of the day, perhaps a card or a small gift, despite our financial problems. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. My parents were usually up before me, Mom making coffee, and Dad reading news on his tablet. "Mom, Dad," I called out, walking through the empty house. There was no response. Their bedroom door was open, and I could see right away that something was wrong. The closet doors were open, and many of their clothes were gone. Dad's watch case that usually sat on the dresser was missing. Mom's jewelry box was empty. On the kitchen counter, I found a note written in my mother's handwriting. "Diana, we have decided to start over in California. We are not in a position to take you with us. The house payment is overdue. Utilities will probably be shut off soon. You are smart and resourceful. You will figure things out. There is some food in the pantry. Your Uncle Jack's number is in the address book if you need it. Do not try to contact us. We will reach out when we are settled. Mom and Dad." I read the note 7 times, trying to make sense of the words. They had left me. They had actually left me alone in a house with no electricity, almost no food, and overdue bills. I was 13 years old. At first, I thought it must be some kind of cruel joke or test. They would come back by evening, surely. They could not have actually abandoned their child. But as the day progressed and the house remained empty, the reality began to sink in. I tried calling both their cell phones. Both were disconnected. I checked their emails on the family computer. Their accounts had been closed. It was as if they had erased themselves from existence except for the note that proved they had consciously chosen to leave me behind. I did not call Uncle Jack right away. Some mixture of shock, denial, and shame kept me from reaching out. I did not want to believe this was really happening, and I did not want anyone else to know. What would people think? What had I done to make my own parents abandon me? For the next 2 weeks, I tried to survive on my own. I rationed the food in the pantry, which consisted mostly of canned beans, some pasta crackers, and a few cans of soup. I kept going to school, pretending everything was normal, afraid that if authorities found out, something worse would happen to me. At night, I would lie awake, jumping at every sound, terrified of being alone in the empty house. I kept the lights off to avoid drawing attention from neighbors and to conserve electricity for as long as it lasted. I washed my clothes in the bathroom sink with hand soap because there was no laundry detergent left. By the end of the first week, the food was running dangerously low. I had been skipping breakfast and lunch, saving what little I had for a small dinner each night. My stomach constantly ached with hunger. I started taking extra fruit from the school cafeteria and hiding it in my backpack. The neighbors must have noticed something was off. Mrs. Hendricks from next door knocked on the door one afternoon. "Diana, sweetie, everything okay? I have not seen your parents' cars lately," she asked when I opened the door just a crack. "They are on a business trip," I lied. "My aunt is coming to stay with me tonight." She looked skeptical but nodded. "Well, I made too much casserole. Thought you might want some." That casserole was the first proper meal I had eaten in days. I cried as I ate it alone at the kitchen table. The school counselor, Ms. Garcia, pulled me aside after noticing I had worn the same clothes for several days and seemed withdrawn in class. "Diana, is everything all right at home?" she asked gently. "Yes, everything is fine," I replied automatically, the lie becoming easier with practice. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? That is what I am here for." I nodded but said nothing more. I was afraid of what would happen if I told the truth. Would I be put in foster care? Would everyone at school know I had been abandoned? The shame was overwhelming. By the end of the second week, reality had become impossible to hide. The electricity had been shut off. I had no way to heat food or take a warm shower. The food was completely gone, and I had resorted to asking friends at school if they had extra lunch items they did not want. One morning, I arrived at school looking visibly unwell. I had not eaten in nearly 2 days and had been sleeping in my coat because there was no heat. Ms. Garcia took one look at me and brought me to her office. "Diana, I need you to be honest with me right now. Where are your parents?" And finally, I broke down. The words came pouring out between sobs. "They left me. They went to California. There is no food. The electricity is off. I do not know what to do." Ms. Garcia immediately contacted Child Protective Services. A social worker named Janet came to the school that same day. She took me back to the house to collect some of my belongings, and I showed her the note my parents had left. "This is neglect and abandonment, Diana," Janet said firmly. "What your parents did is illegal. It is not your fault." But despite her reassurances, I could not shake the feeling that I had done something to deserve this. Why else would my own parents leave me behind? Janet tried contacting my parents through every channel possible but found nothing. It was as if they had vanished. Finally, she asked if there were any other family members who might take me in. "My Uncle Jack," I said quietly. "He lives in Seattle." The social worker contacted Uncle Jack immediately. I sat in her office wrapped in a blanket she had given me, sipping hot chocolate and trying not to think about what would happen next. Where would I go? Would I be placed with strangers? Would I have to change schools? The phone call lasted nearly an hour. I could hear only Janet's side of the conversation, full of legal terms and explanations of the situation. When she hung up, she smiled at me for the first time. "Your uncle is catching the next flight from Seattle," she said. "He should be here by tonight." True to his word, Uncle Jack arrived just before midnight. I was staying at an emergency children's home, a temporary placement, until more permanent arrangements could be made. When they brought me to the visiting room and I saw him standing there, I broke down again. Uncle Jack crossed the room in 3 long strides and wrapped me in the tightest hug. He smelled like airport coffee and the pine aftershave he always wore. It was the most comforting scent in the world at that moment. "I am so sorry, Diana," he whispered into my hair. "I am so sorry this happened to you." I could feel him trembling with what I would later understand was a mixture of sorrow and rage. His sister, my mother, had abandoned her child. His niece had been left to starve alone in an empty house. The betrayal was beyond comprehension. "I did not know who else to call," I said between sobs. "I am sorry." Uncle Jack pulled back and looked me in the eyes. His were red-rimmed and fierce with determination. "Listen to me, Diana. You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. What happened is not your fault. Your parents made unforgivable choices. But I am here now, and I am not going anywhere. Do you understand I am not going anywhere?" The next few days were a blur of meetings with lawyers, social workers, and family court representatives. Uncle Jack had to formally apply for guardianship, and there were concerns about granting custody to someone who lived in another state. But Jack was relentless. "I own my own company. I can work remotely for as long as needed. I have the financial resources to provide everything Diana needs. I am her blood relative. There is no one better suited to care for her," he argued in meetings. In the meantime, he rented a furnished apartment in Millfield and moved in temporarily, refusing to let me spend another night in the children's home. He brought me new clothes books and a laptop. He cooked proper meals and sat with me while I ate, sometimes having to encourage me to take just one more bite because my stomach had shrunk from weeks of near starvation. "We are going to get through this together," he would say every night before I went to sleep. After 3 weeks of legal battles and paperwork, Uncle Jack was granted temporary guardianship. We began making plans to move to Seattle. "You will love it there," he promised. "My house is right near a park with the biggest trees you have ever seen. There is a great school just 10 minutes away, and I have a spare bedroom that you can decorate however you want." The day we left Millfield, I felt strangely empty. This town had been my home for 13 years, but in those final weeks, it had also been the site of the deepest betrayal imaginable. As Jack drove us to the airport, I watched the familiar streets pass by for the last time. "Do you think they will ever come back?" I asked quietly. Uncle Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I do not know, Diana. But what I do know is that we are not going to wait around to find out. We are moving forward. Together." Seattle was nothing like Millfield. It was bigger, busier, and constantly shrouded in a light mist that made everything seem slightly magical. Uncle Jack's house was not the mansion I had expected from someone as successful as him, but a warm, modest four-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood full of towering pine trees. My room, as promised, was spacious and bright, with a window seat overlooking the backyard garden. Jack had left it deliberately neutral with white walls and simple furniture. "We can paint it any color you want," he said. "Get new curtains, posters, whatever you like. This is your space now." Starting at a new school midway through the year was challenging. I was quieter than I had been before, more withdrawn. The trauma of abandonment had left me wary of forming new connections. What if these new friends left me too? What if Uncle Jack changed his mind about wanting me? Jack noticed my struggles and arranged for me to see a therapist, Dr. Winters, who specialized in childhood trauma and abandonment issues. "It is not a punishment," Jack explained when I initially resisted. "It is a tool. Just like you would see a doctor for a broken arm, you see a therapist for emotional wounds. And Diana, what happened to you that is a serious wound?" Dr. Winters helped me understand that my parents' actions reflected their own failures, not mine. We worked through the guilt and shame that had been weighing me down. Slowly, I began to open up at school, to make friends, to trust that not everyone would leave me. Throughout it all, Uncle Jack was my rock. He came to every school event, helped with every homework assignment, celebrated every small victory. When nightmares would wake me, he would be there with hot chocolate and patience, sitting with me until I felt safe enough to sleep again. For the first year, I insisted on calling him Uncle Jack, rather than just Jack as he had suggested. The title was important to me, a reminder of our family connection, proof that I belonged somewhere. We tried multiple times to contact my parents. Jack hired a private investigator who managed to trace them to San Diego, but all attempts at communication went unanswered. No phone calls returned, no emails acknowledged, no letters responded to. On rare occasions, we would find social media posts showing them at beaches or restaurants looking tanned and carefree. No mention of a daughter left behind. No signs of remorse or concern. They had simply erased me from their narrative. My 16th birthday was the day I stopped looking for signs of their return. Uncle Jack had planned a small party with my new friends from school. He had decorated the house with purple balloons, remembering my childhood favorite color. There was a chocolate cake and thoughtful gifts. As I blew out the candles, I realized I no longer wished for my parents to come back. I wished for the strength to keep moving forward without them. 2 years later, at my high school graduation, I scanned the audience out of habit, still half expecting to see them there. The only familiar face in the crowd was Uncle Jack's, beaming with pride as I accepted my diploma with honors. "They do not deserve to see the amazing person you have become," Jack told me later that night. "But I am so grateful that I get to." Just as I was preparing to start my sophomore year of college, Uncle Jack was diagnosed with stage 2 pancreatic cancer. The news hit like a physical blow. The one person who had never left me, the one constant in my life, was facing a battle with a notoriously aggressive disease. College suddenly became secondary as I tried to balance classes with being there for Uncle Jack. The hospital became a second home during those initial weeks of diagnosis and treatment planning. I would bring my textbooks and study in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed, while doctors came and went with test results and treatment options. "You should be in your dorm having the full college experience," Jack would say, watching me highlight passages in my economics textbook. "I am right where I need to be." I would answer, refusing to budge. Jack's oncologist, Dr. Patel, was cautiously optimistic. They had caught the cancer relatively early, which was rare for pancreatic cancer. The treatment would be aggressive surgery followed by rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. But there was hope. "I am not going anywhere anytime soon," Jack promised me the night before his surgery. "I still have to see you graduate college, start your career, fall in love. I have a lot of living left to do. The surgery was successful, removing the tumor and affected tissue. The recovery was brutal. Jack, always strong and vibrant, looked frail in the hospital bed. But his determination never wavered. I took a semester off to help with his care despite his protests. During those months, our roles reversed. I became the caregiver, managing medications, preparing the bland foods he could tolerate, driving him to appointments. "You know what this reminds me of?" Jack said one evening, as I helped him back to bed after a particularly rough day of chemotherapy. "When you first came to live with me, I was so worried about doing everything right, about making you feel safe. Now look at you taking care of me with such confidence." "I had a good teacher," I replied. As Jack began to regain his strength, he insisted I return to school. "Your education is non-negotiable," he said firmly. "It is your future, Diana. I did not step up to be your guardian just to watch you put your life on hold." We compromised. I returned to classes but lived at home rather than in the dorms. I scheduled my courses so I could still drive Jack to his treatments. I studied late into the night to maintain my GPA while balancing caregiving responsibilities. It was during this period that I decided to major in finance. Jack's business acumen had always impressed me, and watching him navigate medical bills while ensuring his company ran smoothly in his absence gave me a new appreciation for financial management. "Smart choice," Jack nodded when I told him. "Money is not everything, as we both know all too well from your parents' example, but understanding how to manage it properly gives you freedom and security." After a year of treatments, we received the news we had been praying for: remission. The scans showed no evidence of disease. We celebrated with a small dinner party at home, inviting Dr. Patel and a few close friends who had supported us through the ordeal. "To second chances," Jack toasted that night, his eyes meeting mine with shared understanding of just how precious those chances were. With Jack's health improving, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor. I graduated at the top of my class with a degree in finance and immediately received several job offers from respected firms in Seattle. I accepted a position at Anderson Financial Advisors, a boutique firm that specialized in helping families build sustainable wealth and security. The irony was not lost on me. The girl who had been abandoned because she was supposedly a financial burden was now helping others manage their money responsibly. My first apartment was a small but sunny one-bedroom just 10 minutes from Jack's house. I could have afforded something more luxurious with my new salary, but years of witnessing Jack's modest approach to his wealth had influenced me. Comfort over flashiness, security over show. "You did good, kiddo," Jack said when he helped me move in using the nickname he had given me years ago. "Really good." Those next few years were some of the happiest of my life. I excelled at my job, eventually being promoted to senior financial advisor with my own client portfolio. Jack's health remained stable, and he returned to running his company with the same enthusiasm as before his diagnosis. We had dinner together at least once a week, a tradition we both protected fiercely. Sometimes we would try new restaurants, other times I would cook at my place, or we would order takeout at his. The content of the meal mattered less than the time together. Dating was complicated for me. The abandonment issues did not simply disappear with therapy and time. They lingered, making it difficult to trust potential partners with my heart. I went on dates, had a few short relationships, but kept people at arm's length. "You cannot protect yourself from hurt by avoiding love," Jack advised gently after I ended things with a perfectly nice guy because he wanted to get more serious. "That is like avoiding sunshine because you are afraid of getting burned." "Easy for you to say," I retorted. "You have never been abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally." Jack nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. "Fair point. But I have lost people I loved, Diana. Different circumstances, but the same fear is at play. The fear that if you give your heart fully, you will not survive the loss. But the alternative is a half-lived life." His words stayed with me, and slowly I began to open myself to the possibility of deeper connections. I met Michael, a pediatric surgeon, at a hospital fundraiser my firm had sponsored. Unlike previous men I had dated, Michael did not push for rapid intimacy or make demands on my time and emotions. He seemed to instinctively understand my need for space and patience. On our fifth date, I told him about my parents. It was the first time I had voluntarily shared that story with someone outside my closest circle. Michael listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving mine, his hand reaching across the table to hold mine when my voice faltered. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said when I finished. "It explains a lot about why you are so independent and cautious. But Diana, it also makes me admire your resilience even more." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Michael became a fixture in my life. He got along well with Jack, the two of them often ganging up on me good-naturedly about my workaholic tendencies or my stubborn independence. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt secure and fulfilling. And then 5 years after his initial diagnosis, Jack's cancer returned. The news came after a routine scan, the kind Jack had every 6 months as a precaution. This time, the cancer was more aggressive, appearing in multiple locations. The oncologist's face said everything before the words were spoken. "We will fight this with everything we have," Dr. Patel assured us. "But I want to be transparent about the challenges ahead." Jack took the news with the same stoicism he approached everything in life. "Well, we beat it once. We will just have to do it again." But we both knew this time was different. The treatment options were more limited, the prognosis more guarded. Jack started a new experimental chemotherapy regimen that left him exhausted and weak. I took another leave from work, this time with the full support of my firm. Michael stepped up in ways I had not expected, covering shifts for colleagues, so he could help with Jack's care, researching clinical trials, and simply being present when I needed someone to lean on. The months that followed were a roller coaster of brief improvements, followed by sharp declines. Jack fought with everything he had, but his body was wearing down. As winter turned to spring, it became clear that we were no longer fighting for remission, but for time. One evening, as I sat beside Jack's bed, reading aloud from one of his favorite books, he interrupted me. "Diana, we need to talk about what happens next." I closed the book, my heart constricting. "We do not need to do this now." "Yes, we do." His voice was weak but determined. "I have updated my will. Everything is in order. You will be taken care of." "Jack, please. Listen to me. This is important." He reached for my hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. "You are the daughter of my heart, Diana. Everything I have built, everything I have saved, it is yours. I have made sure of that." Tears streamed down my face. "I do not care about any of that. I just want more time with you." Jack's eyes softened. "I know, and I have treasured every minute we have had together. You saved me as much as I saved you, you know? You gave my life purpose and joy when I was just a workaholic bachelor with no one to come home to." We sat in silence for a while, hands clasped. Then Jack added something that seemed cryptic at the time. "I have also made sure that certain wrongs will be righted. When the time comes, you will understand." I did not press him for details, assuming he was referring to charitable bequests or business matters. I had no idea he was talking about my parents. As spring turned to summer, Jack's condition deteriorated rapidly. The experimental treatments were discontinued when it became clear they were causing more suffering without benefit. We transitioned to hospice care at home, with the focus shifting to keeping him comfortable. Those final weeks were filled with quiet moments of connection. Friends visited to say goodbye. Business associates came to assure him his company would continue his legacy. Through it all, Jack maintained his dignity and his concern for my well-being. "Promise me you will let yourself be happy," he said one night as I adjusted his pillows. "Promise me you will not close yourself off from life because of grief." "I promise," I whispered, though I could not imagine feeling happiness in a world without him. On a warm July evening, with golden sunlight streaming through the windows and the gentle sound of wind chimes from the garden, Uncle Jack passed away peacefully with me holding his hand. His last words to me were, "You are loved, Diana. Never forget that." The grief that followed was overwhelming. Despite knowing it was coming, despite all the preparations and goodbyes, the finality of his absence hit me like a physical blow. For the first time since my parents abandoned me, I felt truly alone in the world. Michael was my anchor during those dark days, handling funeral arrangements, when I could not face them, fielding calls from well-wishers ensuring I ate and slept. The service was well attended, a testament to how many lives Jack had touched. I stood numbly beside his casket, accepting condolences from faces that blurred together. It was during the reception following the funeral that I received an email that would change everything. The notification chimed on my phone and I checked it absently, grateful for any distraction from the weight of grief. The email was from an address I did not recognize with the subject line regarding Jack Williams' funeral. The content was brief and stunning. Diana, we have just learned about Jack's passing. We will be attending the funeral tomorrow to pay our respects to my brother. It has been too long. Thomas and Judith Williams. After 15 years of silence, my parents were reaching out. Not with an apology or explanation for abandoning me, not with condolences for my loss, but with a casual notice of their impending arrival, as if they had merely been away on an extended vacation. I showed the email to Michael, my hands shaking with a mixture of shock and rage. "You do not have to see them," he said immediately. "We can have security at the funeral. They have no right to just show up like this." But a part of me needed to see them, needed to look in the eyes of the people who had walked away from their 13-year-old daughter without a backward glance. I needed to know who they were now, and perhaps understand why they had done what they did. "No," I said finally. "Let them come. I am not that scared, hungry child anymore." True to their word, my parents appeared at the funeral the next day. I might not have recognized them if I had not been watching for their arrival. 15 years had changed them. My father's hair was now completely gray, his face lined and weathered. My mother had clearly had cosmetic work done, her features unnaturally tight, her hair a shade of blonde that did not occur in nature. They stood at the back of the gathered mourners, not approaching me immediately. I felt their presence like an electric current in the air, every nerve ending suddenly alert to their proximity. Michael stood beside me, his hand at the small of my back, a silent pillar of support. After the service concluded and people began to disperse, they finally made their way toward me. There was a surreal quality to watching my parents walk across the cemetery lawn, these strangers who shared my blood. "Diana." My mother spoke first, her voice both familiar and foreign. "You have grown up beautifully." No hello. No, "I am sorry for your loss." No acknowledgement of their abandonment. "Judith." "Thomas." I addressed them by their first names, deliberately denying them the titles of mom and dad they had forfeited long ago. My father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Jack was a good man. We are sorry for your loss." The banality of the statement, the sheer inadequacy of it in the face of everything that had happened, ignited something in me. "Are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "Are you sorry that the man who stepped up when you stepped out is gone? Are you sorry that the person who made sure I did not end up in foster care or on the streets is being buried today? Are you sorry for any of it?" My mother's face tightened with displeasure. "Diana, this is hardly the place for such a discussion. We came to pay our respects to my brother." 15 years, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. 15 years without a word. No birthday cards, no graduation congratulations, no explanation for why you abandoned your child. And now you show up at his funeral and expect what exactly? People were starting to stare, but I no longer cared. Years of suppressed anger and hurt were finally finding their voice. My father shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the onlookers. "We knew you would be fine. Jack always had a soft spot for you. He had the resources to give you things we could not." "Things?" I was incredulous. "You think this was about things? I was 13 years old, alone in an empty house with no electricity and no food. I was your child, not an inconvenient possession you could discard when times got tough." My mother's expression hardened, the artificial smoothness of her face making her look like a wax figure. "We did what we had to do to survive. You have clearly done well for yourself. Jack saw to that." There was something in her tone, a calculation that had not been evident in her email. A suspicion began to form in my mind. "Why are you really here?" I asked directly. "After all these years, why come back now?" They exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicions before my father answered. "We understand Jack was quite successful with his company. As his only living sister, Judith is naturally concerned about his estate and final wishes." And there it was. They had not come for closure or reconciliation. They certainly had not come to support me in my grief. They had come for money. Jack's money. The realization broke something open inside me. Tears I had been holding back all day began to flow freely. "Get out," I said, my voice low but intense. "Get out of here right now before I say things I cannot take back." "Now listen here." My father began, his tone turning aggressive. Michael stepped forward, placing himself slightly between us. "I believe Diana has made herself clear. This is a day to honor Jack's memory, not to discuss financial matters. I suggest you leave." My parents looked from Michael to me, clearly reassessing the situation. Finally, my mother spoke. "We are staying at the Marriott downtown. We expect to hear from Jack's lawyer about the reading of the will. We are family after all." With that parting shot, they turned and walked away, leaving me once again shattered by their callousness. I collapsed against Michael as soon as they were out of sight, my body shaking with sobs. "They came for his money," I choked out. "They abandoned me, ignored me for 15 years and came back for his money." Michael held me tightly, his voice fierce in my ear. "They will not get a penny. Jack would never have allowed that. Never." I nodded against his chest, clinging to that belief. Jack had always protected me. Somehow I had to trust he would protect me one last time. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following week at the offices of Patterson and Associates, Jack's longtime legal counsel. I had met with Mr. Patterson several times over the years, as Jack had included me in his estate planning discussions once I was an adult. "No surprises," Jack had always insisted. "I want you to know exactly what to expect." But as I arrived at the law offices that gray morning, I realized there might be surprises after all. My parents were already there, seated in the elegant waiting area, dressed expensively, as if attending a business meeting rather than the distribution of a loved one's final wishes. My mother looked up as I entered, offering a tight smile that did not reach her eyes. My father merely nodded in acknowledgement. Neither stood to greet me. I took a seat as far from them as possible, grateful when Michael arrived minutes later, bringing coffee and quiet strength. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mr. Patterson's assistant ushered us into a conference room. The elderly lawyer greeted me with genuine warmth, clasping my hand between both of his. "Diana, again, my deepest condolences. Jack was so proud of you." He turned to my parents with considerably less enthusiasm. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams, it has been many years." "Too many," my mother replied smoothly. "But family is not it." Mr. Patterson's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Indeed. Shall we proceed?" We took our seats around the polished conference table. Mr. Patterson opened a leather portfolio and adjusted his reading glasses. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Jackson Edward Williams," he began formally. "Before I begin, I should note that Mr. Williams updated his will most recently 6 months ago when his health began to decline. He was of sound mind and judgment at that time, as attested by 2 witnesses and a medical professional." My father shifted impatiently. Yes. Can we get to the distribution?" Mr. Patterson fixed him with a stern look. "This is not a process to be rushed, Mr. Williams. Your brother-in-law put considerable thought into his final wishes." He began reading through the standard legal language that began the document. Jack had left specific bequests to several charities, including a substantial donation to pancreatic cancer research and a scholarship fund for foster children pursuing higher education. His longtime housekeeper received a generous sum, as did several loyal employees from his company. Throughout these initial bequests, my mother's expression grew increasingly pinched. She interrupted multiple times with questions about the total value of the estate. "For the record," Mr. Patterson finally stated, clearly annoyed by the interruptions, "Mr. Williams's estate is valued at approximately $15 million, including real estate holdings, investment accounts, and his company shares." My father let out a low whistle. My mother sat up straighter. "Now, regarding the primary distribution of assets, Mr. Patterson continued, glancing at me with what seemed like concern. Before he could continue, my father interjected again. "As Jack's only living sister, naturally Judith is a primary beneficiary." Mr. Patterson removed his glasses slowly. "Actually, Mr. Williams, there is something that needs to be addressed before we continue with the distribution. Jack instructed me to read this letter at this juncture. He removed an envelope from the portfolio and opened it carefully. This is in Jack's own words, he explained before beginning to read. If my sister Judith and her husband Thomas are present for this reading, I want certain facts to be known. Shortly after they abandoned their 13-year-old daughter Diana, I hired a private investigator to understand exactly what had happened. What I discovered was beyond my worst fears. 6 months before they left Diana alone and hungry in that house, Judith and Thomas came to me claiming they needed financial help for Diana's education and medical needs. I provided them with a sum of $50,000 specifically earmarked for Diana's care. Bank records show they transferred that money to a new account in California the very next day. The investigator confirmed they had been planning their escape for months, deliberately using their own daughter as leverage to extract money they never intended to use for her benefit. They purchased a condo in San Diego, a new car, and took several luxury vacations with funds that were meant for Diana's care. In the years that followed, they built comfortable lives in California, never once reaching out to check on the welfare of their child. The daughter they claimed was too expensive to care for cost them nothing, while they enjoyed the fruits of their deception. I have kept this information from Diana to spare her the additional pain of knowing the full extent of their betrayal, but I believe that in death, the full truth should be known. Mr. Patterson stopped reading and looked up. The room was deathly quiet. I sat frozen, a new wave of shock washing over me. It had not been just abandonment. It had been calculated, premeditated exploitation. My mother's face had drained of color. My father's jaw worked silently, as if chewing on words he could not spit out. Mr. Patterson continued reading from Jack's letter. It is with this history in mind that I make the following declaration. Judith and Thomas Williams are specifically and deliberately disinherited from my estate. They shall receive no portion of my assets, property, or holdings. Furthermore, should they contest this will in any way attempt to claim any portion of my estate or cause any distress to Diana in the aftermath of my passing, an additional clause shall be triggered, whereby all documentation of their fraud and child abandonment will be submitted to the proper authorities for potential criminal prosecution, regardless of statutes of limitation for civil claims. Mr. Patterson folded the letter and returned it to the portfolio. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, my mother found her voice. This is slander. He cannot prove any of this. Actually, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Patterson said calmly, he can and did. The full documentation is held in our secure files, including bank transfers, communications with realtors in California dating months before your departure, and sworn statements from neighbors who witnessed Diana's condition after you left. Jack was nothing if not thorough. My father stood abruptly, his face mottled with rage. This will not stand. We will contest this. Judith is his sister. Blood family has rights. You are welcome to try, Mr. Patterson replied, unruffled. However, I should point out that contesting the will would not only trigger the release of the documentation I mentioned, but there is an additional clause you might want to consider. He flipped to another page of the will. In the event that Judith and Thomas Williams contest this will in any manner, the sum of $1 million that would otherwise go to various charities will instead be placed in a fund specifically designated to pursue all possible legal remedies against them for their actions, including child endangerment, fraud, and embezzlement. My father slowly sat back down, the fight visibly draining from him. Mr. Patterson turned to me, his expression softening. Diana, as for you, Jack has left you his entire estate minus the specific bequests already mentioned. This includes his home, all investment accounts, and controlling interest in his company. There are some additional personal items and letters he left specifically for you, which we can discuss privately. I nodded numbly, unable to process the full scope of what had just been revealed. The inheritance itself meant little to me at that moment. What overwhelmed me was the lengths Jack had gone to protect me, not just in life, but even after his death. My mother stood up, gathering her designer purse with trembling hands. This is not over, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, Mrs. Williams, it is, Mr. Patterson replied firmly. You have a choice to make right now. You can walk away with your freedom and what remains of your reputation, or you can pursue this and face the consequences Jack outlined. I strongly advise the former. My father joined her, glaring at me as if I had somehow orchestrated this outcome. You think you have won, but money does not buy happiness, Diana. I found my voice at last. No, it does not. Love, security, and integrity do. Uncle Jack taught me that. It is a shame you never learned it yourselves. They left without another word, the door closing behind them with a decisive click. In that moment, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I had carried for 15 years without fully realizing its presence. Mr. Patterson reached across the table and patted my hand. Jack wanted you to know that he considered getting custody of you the greatest blessing of his life. Not a burden, never an obligation, but a gift. Through my tears, I managed to smile. The feeling was mutual. My parents made one last attempt to intimidate me as they left the law office. In the elevator down to the lobby, my mother turned to me with a venomous glare. You may have his money now, but you will always be the unwanted child we left behind. No amount of inheritance can change that. The words were designed to wound deeply, to reopen the scars of abandonment that had taken years to heal. In the past, they might have succeeded, but something had shifted within me during the reading of the will. The final piece of the puzzle had been revealed, and with it came a strange sense of closure. You are right about one thing, I replied calmly. No amount of money can change the past. Nothing can change the fact that you chose greed over your own child. That is your legacy, not mine. The elevator doors opened, and they walked out without looking back. I knew with absolute certainty that it was the last time I would ever see them. Back in Mr. Patterson's office, he handed me a small wooden box. Jack wanted you to have this privately, he explained. Said it contained things too personal for the formal reading. Inside the box were several items: a handwritten letter sealed in an envelope with my name on it, the purple ribbon I had worn in my hair the day I moved to Seattle, photographs of Jack and me through the years, and a small velvet jewelry box containing his mother's, my grandmother's emerald ring. There is one more thing, Mr. Patterson said. Jack established a trust specifically for your future children's education. He said, and I quote, Diana will be a wonderful mother someday when she is ready. I want to make sure her children never worry about their future the way she had to. Fresh tears filled my eyes. Even now, Jack was looking ahead, planning for a family I did not yet have, ensuring that the cycle of insecurity would be broken permanently. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of grief and responsibility. There was an estate to manage, a company to oversee, and my own healing to attend to. I took a longer leave from my job, unsure if I would return now that I had responsibility for Jack's business interests. Michael was my constant support during this period. He never pushed for decisions or imposed his opinions, simply offered his presence and understanding when I needed it most. I need some time, I told him one evening as we sat in Jack's garden, now my garden. To figure out what comes next, to process everything that has happened. Take all the time you need, he said simply. I am not going anywhere. Those words, so similar to what Jack had promised me years ago, brought fresh tears. Michael held me as I cried, understanding that grief does not follow a linear path. I read Jack's letter that night alone in the house that was now mine. His words were full of love, pride, and hope for my future. He wrote about how watching me overcome my past had inspired him, how my resilience had given him strength during his own battle with cancer. You have a choice now, he wrote near the end. You can allow the pain of the past to define you, or you can use it as the foundation for something beautiful. I know which one you will choose because I have seen your heart. That letter became my touchstone in the months that followed. When grief threatened to overwhelm me, when responsibilities seemed too heavy, I would return to those words and find strength. I decided to use part of my inheritance to establish a foundation for abandoned and neglected children, providing resources for their education, therapy, and transition to adulthood. I named it the Jackson Foundation, in honor of the man who had shown me what true family meant. Professionally, I found a balance that worked. I brought in experienced executives to handle the day-to-day operations of Jack's company, but maintained oversight of major decisions. I returned to financial advising part-time, focusing specifically on helping vulnerable families create security for their children. My relationship with Michael deepened as we navigated this new chapter together. When he proposed a year after Jack's passing, it was with complete understanding of my complex relationship with commitment and family. "I know trusting someone with your heart is the hardest thing in the world for you," he said, holding the ring but not yet placing it on my finger. "I am asking you to trust me with it anyway, to believe that not everyone leaves." I thought of Jack's letter, of his hope for my future, of his belief in my capacity to choose love over fear. "Yes," I said, extending my hand. "I trust you." We were married in a small ceremony in Jack's now our backyard garden. The space beside me, where a father would traditionally stand, was filled instead with a framed photograph of Jack, a symbolic presence on the day he had looked forward to, but would not see. 5 years have passed since then. The company continues to thrive. The foundation has helped hundreds of children find stability and support. Michael and I welcomed our daughter Jacqueline 2 years ago, named for the man who changed the course of my life with his unconditional love. I still run support groups for adults who experienced childhood abandonment. In sharing my story, I have found purpose in helping others recognize that their worth is not determined by those who left, but by their own capacity to survive and thrive despite that leaving. The journey from that hungry, frightened 13-year-old girl to the woman I am today has been marked by both incredible pain and extraordinary love. I have learned that family is not always blood, that security comes from within, as much as from external circumstances, and that the deepest wounds can become sources of the greatest strength. I keep nothing of my parents in my home or my life. Their absence is a fact of my history, but no longer a defining feature of my story. Instead, I have chosen to build my life around the legacy of the man who stepped forward when others stepped back, who showed me that love is an action more than a feeling. Sometimes when I watch my daughter playing in the same garden where I once found healing, I think about the strange twists of fate that brought me here. How abandonment led to belonging, how loss opened the door to gain, how the family that discarded me made way for the family that cherished me. Justice came in its own time and in its own way, not through vengeance or retribution, but through living well, loving deeply, and breaking the cycle of abandonment once and for all. In the end, perhaps that is the most important lesson I have learned sometimes. The family we create matters more than the family we come from. Sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings, and sometimes the people who leave teach us to truly value those who stay. If you have ever felt abandoned or betrayed by those who should have loved you, know that your story does not end there. It is just beginning. Your worth is not determined by those who failed to see it, but by the strength you find in continuing forward. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories of resilience, and leave a comment, letting me know if you have ever had to create your own definition of family. How did you find healing after betrayal? Your experiences might help someone else who is still on their journey. Remember, the family that matters most is often the one we choose, and sometimes the greatest act of self-love is deciding who deserves a place in your story.